The reservation was under a different name, and the man at the pass did not know that yet. It was 7 minutes past 8 on a Friday, and the dining room at Lattice was full of the soft clink of crystal and the low hum of money at ease. Naomi Carver sat alone at table 14, a two-top near the window, her hands folded on the white linen. She had ordered nothing. She had been waiting 11 minutes for a server to return with the wine list she had asked for, and in that time 3 other tables had been greeted, seated, poured for, and made to feel like the only people in the world. A server had finally come, a young woman with a tight ponytail, and had taken 2 steps toward table 14 before a voice from the open kitchen stopped her. The voice belonged to the executive chef. He came out from behind pass wiping his hands on a folded towel, and he looked at Naomi the way a man looks at a stain on a jacket he is about to wear. He did not lower his voice. He told the server that table 14 would not be served tonight. He said it was a matter of the kitchen being at capacity. He said it in front of 40 people who were not at capacity at all. Naomi did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She reached into the small leather case beside her water glass, and she set a single card on the linen, face up, and she slid it across the table toward the edge nearest him. What was on that card made a man who had cooked for heads of state go the color of the tablecloth. Before we get to that, you need to understand who was actually sitting at table 14, and why a brass measuring spoon worn smooth on one edge was the only thing she had brought with her that mattered. Let me take you back. Naomi grew up in a town in eastern North Carolina where the main road had 2 restaurants, and one of them was her grandmother's. It was not a restaurant the way the word is used now. It was a converted filling station with 4 tables inside, and a screen door that slapped when it shut, and a hand-painted board out front that listed 3 things and their prices. Pearl Carver had run it for 31 years. Pearl did not have a culinary degree. She had a 6th grade education, and a memory that could hold 100 orders without a single ticket, and she had a way of tasting a pot of greens with the back of a spoon, and knowing to the half teaspoon what it was missing. People drove 40 miles for her cornbread. A man who had eaten in Paris once told her, with tears in his eyes, that her butter beans were the best thing he had ever put in his mouth. And Pearl had said thank you and gone back to the stove because there was a line. Naomi spent every summer of her childhood in that kitchen. She started by shelling beans on an upturned crate by the back door, a chipped enamel bowl in her lap, and the screen door slapping every time a customer came or went. By the time she was 9, she was allowed to stir, and by 12 she could taste a thing and tell her grandmother what it wanted. Pearl never praised her for it. Pearl would just nod once, and that nod was worth more than any trophy Naomi ever earned later. She remembered one August afternoon in particular. A pot of greens had been going since morning, and Pearl had been called to the front to settle a bill, and she had pointed her chin at the pot and said, "Taste that for me." Naomi was 11. She lifted the spoon and tasted and stood there a moment, and when Pearl came back, Naomi said it needed a little more vinegar and a pinch of sugar to lift it. Pearl tasted it herself, looked at the girl over the rim of the spoon, and added exactly that, vinegar and a pinch of sugar, and said nothing. And the saying of nothing was the whole conversation. That was the day Naomi understood. She had a mouth that could be trusted, and that a trusted mouth was a thing the world could not take from you, no matter what else it took. There was a spoon Pearl used for tasting. It was a brass measuring spoon, the tablespoon size, that had come from Pearl's own mother, and the years had worn one edge of it down to a thin, bright lip from being dragged across the bottom of 10,000 pots. Pearl kept it on a nail by the stove. She told Naomi that a cook who could not taste was just a person following directions, and that the spoon was for tasting, not for measuring, because measuring was for people who did not trust their own mouths. Pearl said a thing once that Naomi carried the rest of her life. She said that a kitchen will always tell you the truth about a person because nobody can fake what they do when the orders are stacked and the night is going wrong. She said you find out who somebody is by how they cook when it is hard. Naomi believed her. She believed her so completely that she built an entire life on it. When Naomi was 17, Pearl's hands began to shake. The diagnosis came slowly, and then all at once, and within 2 years the screen door stopped slapping because there was no one to make it slap. Pearl spent her last months teaching Naomi everything she had never written down, dictating from a kitchen chair while Naomi cooked, correcting her by smell from across the room. The day before she died, Pearl took the brass spoon off its nail and pressed it into Naomi's hand and closed her fingers over it, and did not say anything at all. She did not need to. Naomi went to culinary school on a scholarship and 2 jobs. She was the only black woman in her graduating cohort. She finished at the top of it. She spent the next 12 years in kitchens up and down the East, and in every one of them, she did the same thing she had done in her. Grandmother's filling station. She came in early, she tasted everything. She made the food better and let other people put their names on it. She learned that the kitchens of famous restaurants were full of men who had never once stirred a pot when it was hard, and that those men were almost always the ones holding the title. Here's what you need to understand about the work Naomi eventually chose. She did not open her own restaurant, though she could have. She did something quieter, and in its way it reached further. She became an inspector. The anonymous inspectors who decide which restaurants in the world receive a star are among the most secretive professionals in any industry. They book under false names, they pay their own checks, they dine alone or in pairs, they order widely, they return more than once before they decide anything, and they never ever announce themselves. A restaurant can spend a decade chasing a star, and never know which of its thousands of guests held its future in a quiet notebook. The whole system depends on the inspector being invisible. The whole system depends on the inspector being treated by the kitchen exactly the way the kitchen treats everyone. Naomi had been an inspector for 6 years. She was very good at it, for the same reason she had been good at everything in a kitchen. She paid attention. She knew the difference between a sauce that was correct and a sauce that was alive. She could tell from a single bite whether the person who had cooked her food respected it or merely produced it. She carried her grandmother's brass spoon in her bag to every meal she ever inspected, not to use, because using it would have given her away, but because it reminded her what she was tasting for. She had come to Lattice because Lattice was being talked about. Let me paint the picture for you. Lattice had opened 2 years earlier in a glass-fronted building downtown, and from the first week it had been the restaurant that mattered. The executive chef was a man named Theo Brandt, who had trained in 3 countries and who gave interviews in which he described his food as architecture. He had a way of talking about ingredients as if he had personally invented them. The dining room had been designed by someone famous, and the lighting was engineered to make every plate look like a photograph, and the prices were arranged so that the people who could afford them felt the pleasant superiority of being the kind of people who could. Lattice wanted a star. Brandt wanted a star the way some men want air. He had said in 2 separate interviews that the recognition was overdue. The word had reached the inspectors, as words do, and so an inspector had been assigned, and the inspector was Naomi, and she had booked table 14 under the name Naomi Price for a Friday in October. She had been to Lattice twice before that night, on quieter evenings, and both times the food had been very good and the service had been correct, and she had not yet decided. A star is not given for one good night. It is given for consistency, for the promise that a stranger walking in on any evening will be cooked for with the same care. So she had come a 3rd time on the busiest night of the week to see what the kitchen did when it was hard. She found out. It started at the door. The host, a polished young man in a fitted jacket, had looked at her reservation, looked at her, and looked at the reservation again, and asked her twice to confirm the name. He seated her, eventually, at table 14, which was the table by the service station where the busboys staged their trays. The table every restaurant keeps for the guests it does not want near the window, guests it does want. Naomi noticed. Naomi noticed everything. She made a small private note in the place where she kept such notes, which was her memory, and she waited. She had sat at tables like 14 her whole life. She knew the geography of it without being told. She could feel the draft from the kitchen door at her back, the small clatter of staged plates a foot from her shoulder, The way the light from the window tables did not quite reach her. She had eaten in 300 dining rooms, and she had learned to read a room the way she read a source in a single attentive moment, and what this room was telling her, before a word was spoken, was that someone had decided where she belonged the instant she walked through the door. The water came late. The bread did not come at all. A couple was seated 10 minutes after her at the good window two-top and had bread and an amuse and 2 glasses of champagne before Naomi had been handed a menu. She watched the young server with the ponytail glance at her table twice and start toward her twice and be redirected both times by the maitre d', a tall woman who moved through the room like weather. The pattern was not subtle. Naomi had seen it run 100 times in 100 rooms, the quiet choreography by which a place decides, without ever saying so, that a guest is to be allowed to grow tired and leave on her own, so that no one ever has to be the one who refused her. At 8:04, the server with the ponytail finally broke away and came to table 14 and asked Naomi if she could start her with something to drink. Her name, she said, was Marisol, and she would be taking care of her this evening, and she was sorry for the wait. She said the last part quietly, and she meant it. Naomi asked for the wine list. Marisol said she would bring it right away. That was when Brandt came out from behind the pass. You have to understand the geography of a restaurant like Lattice. The kitchen is open, theatrical, a stage behind a long marble counter, and the executive chef stands at the pass like a conductor, and everything that leaves the kitchen passes under his eyes. From the pass, Brandt could see the entire dining room. He had been watching table 14, or rather watching the fact that Marisol kept being sent away from it, and at some point he had made a decision about the woman sitting there, and the decision was visible on his face before he ever opened his mouth. He crossed the floor. He stopped Marisol with a hand on her arm, and he said, loud enough for the 4 nearest tables to hear, that table 14 would not be receiving service tonight. He said the kitchen was slammed. He said it with the particular confidence of a man who has never in his life had to wonder whether a no would be questioned. Marisol said something Naomi could not hear. Brandt answered her without looking at her, his eyes on Naomi the whole time, and what he said was that some people did not understand what kind of restaurant this was, and that it was a kindness, really, to spare them an evening they had clearly not budgeted for. The 4 nearest tables went quiet. A man at the window, two-top, turned in his chair. The maitre d' arrived at Brandt's elbow and murmured something, and Brandt waved it off. Naomi sat very still. Here is the thing about Naomi that the chef could not have known. Stillness was not weakness in her. Stillness was the thing her grandmother had taught her, without ever using the word. The stillness of a person who has already decided and is simply waiting for the moment to land. Under the table, her thumb found the worn edge of the brass spoon in her bag, and she held it and she breathed. She thought about Pearl. She thought about the man who had cried over the butter beans and how her grandmother had simply said, "Thank you," and gone back to the line. She thought about the screen door and the hand-painted board and the 40-mile drives. She thought about how her grandmother had fed everyone who came, the banker and the bricklayer, and the family that could only pay in eggs, and how Pearl had said that the door and food was food, and a person who would not feed you was telling you everything about themselves and nothing about you. She did not stand up and announce who she was. That would have been the easy thing, and the easy thing was almost never the true one. An inspector who announces herself has already failed, because the whole point is to be treated the way the kitchen treats anyone. And she was being treated, right now, the way this kitchen treated a black woman it had decided did not belong. That was the inspection. That was the answer to her grandmother's question about who a person is when it is hard. She had her answer. There was a second thing she had to weigh, though, and it had nothing to do with the star. Marisol was still standing there. The young server with the ponytail had not moved. Her face had gone tight and her eyes were bright, and Naomi understood. With the clarity she brought to everything, that this young woman was watching something happen, that she knew was wrong and did not have the power to stop. Brandt had said it in front of her on purpose. He had made her an instrument of it. He had handed her a humiliation to carry to a guest, and then made the guest the villain for receiving it. That was the thing Naomi could not let stand. Not for herself, for Marisol, and for every server in every dining room who had ever been ordered to carry cruelty on a tray and call it service. So she did the thing she did. She reached into the leather case beside her water glass. Inside it were the ordinary tools of her cover, the receipts, the false name, the pen. And under those, in a slim sleeve she rarely opened in public, was the card that identified her, in the discreet and unmistakable way the organization identified its own, as one of the anonymous inspectors whose visit a restaurant like Lattice would have given a year of revenue to receive. She took it out. She did not hand it to Brandt. Handing it to him would have made it a transaction between the two of them, and this was not about the two of them. She set it on the white linen, face up, and she turned it so that it faced him, and she slid it to the edge of the table nearest where he stood, and she took her hand away. Then she looked up at him, and she said, in a voice that was perfectly level and not loud at all, that she had come to find out what the kitchen did when the night was hard. She said she had her answer now. That was the moment from the beginning of the story. That was the sentence. Brandt looked down at the card. A man's face can change very fast when the floor he has been standing on turns out not to be there. The colour went out of him in stages, from the top down, the way it does. His eyes went from the card to her face and back to the card, reading it again, the way a person reads a word they cannot believe. His mouth opened and produced nothing. The towel was still in his hand, and his hand had begun, very slightly, to shake, which was a thing Naomi noticed, because she noticed everything, and because she knew that particular tremor. It was the tremor of a person who has just understood the size of what they have done. The dining room did not know yet. The four nearest tables only saw a chef gone pale over a small white card. The man at the window two-top had his phone half raised, the way people do now, sensing before they understand that they are present at something. Marisol stood frozen between them, with the unread wine list still in her hand, her knuckles white where she gripped it, and she was looking at Naomi, not at the chef, the way a person looks at someone they have just realized they badly misjudged. For a long moment nobody said anything. A glass clinked somewhere across the room from a table that had heard nothing and was simply enjoying its evening. The maitre d' had stopped moving entirely. The hum of money at ease had gone out of the room near table 14, replaced by the particular, held silence of people who know they are about to find out something. Then Brandt began to speak, and what came out was the language of a man trying to climb back up a cliff he has already fallen off. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said, of course, she would be served, that she would be the guest of the house, that he would cook for her personally, that he would prepare anything she liked. The architecture talk was gone. The interviews were gone. What was left was a man offering to cook, suddenly for the one guest in the world he most needed to impress and had just refused at the door. Naomi let him finish. She had learned long ago that you do not interrupt a man who is busy revealing himself. When he was done, she said one thing. She said that the kitchen had already cooked for her tonight. She said she had tasted exactly what she came to taste. She gathered the card back into its sleeve. She left 2 $20 bills on the table for Marisol. More than enough for water she had not finished, and she stood, and she picked up her leather case, and she walked out of Lattice past the polished host, who could not meet her eyes, and the screen door of her grandmother's filling station slapped shut somewhere in her memory, as the glass door of Lattice eased closed behind her, without a sound now. You might think that is the end of it. The chef humiliated, the inspector gone, the star denied. That would be a satisfying enough story, and it would be a small one, and Naomi did not deal in small things. What happened over the following weeks is the part that matters, the part where a single quiet night in a dining room reorganized an entire institution, and it began, as these things do, the next morning. The video the man at the window table had taken went up that night. He had not caught the card, only the chef going pale, and a black woman gathering her things and leaving with her chin level, but he had caught Brandt's words from earlier, the part about people who had not budgeted for the evening. because he had started recording when the voices rose. By noon the next day, the clip had been watched 200,000 times. By that evening, it was 4 times that. People who had never heard of Lattice knew the name of it now, and they knew it for one thing. Brandt did the thing such men do. He posted a statement. He said his words had been taken out of context. He said the restaurant did not tolerate discrimination of any kind. He said he was committed to listening and learning. The statement made everything worse, because the people who had watched the clip could see that the context was a man refusing to feed a woman in front of a full room, and there is no context that improves that. What none of them knew, not the 400,000 viewers, and not Brandt himself, was that the woman in the video was an inspector and that the report had already been written. The report did not mention the video. The report did not need to. Naomi had written, in the plain and careful language her work required, exactly what had happened in the dining room on a Friday night, when the kitchen was at its busiest, which was the only time that mattered. She wrote that the food, on her 2 prior visits, had been technically accomplished and at moments genuinely fine. She noted the dish that had nearly persuaded her on the 2nd visit, a roasted celery root with a brown butter that had been, for one bite, exactly alive in the way Pearl would have recognized. She wrote that the kitchen's conduct toward a guest, it had judged unworthy, revealed that the care in the cooking did not extend to the care of people, and that a restaurant is not a kitchen. It is a covenant between the people who cook and the people who come, and that this covenant had been broken in full view of the room. She wrote that there would be no star. She wrote the report at her own kitchen table, the real one on a Sunday, with the brass spoon sitting beside the laptop where she had set it down out of habit. She did not write it in anger. Her work did not permit anger, and she had stopped feeling it years before in any case, because anger was a thing you spent and never got back, and she had learned to spend nothing she could not afford. She wrote it the way Pearl had tasted a pot, with attention and without flinching, naming what was there and what was missing. When she was finished, she read it once, top to bottom, and she did not change a word, and she sent it, and she put the spoon back in her bag. A star withheld is a quiet thing. It is not announced. There is no press release that says a restaurant was considered and found wanting. The cruelty of it, and the justice of it, is in the silence. Lattice had spent 2 years and a great deal of money preparing for a recognition that simply never came, and the only people who would ever know precisely why were Naomi, and the colleagues who read her report, and eventually, through the slow and certain channels by which such things travel, the people who owned Lattice. Because here is what Naomi understood about institutions that men like Brandt never do. A chef is not the top of anything. A chef is an employee. Above Brandt there was a hospitality group, and above the hospitality group there were investors, and those investors had put money into Lattice for one reason, which was prestige. And prestige in that world has a specific currency. And the currency is the star, and the star was now gone. And it was gone because of a 30-second decision their celebrated chef had made about a woman at table 14. The owners did not care about the morality of it, not really. That is the cold truth of it, and Naomi knew it, and it did not trouble her, because morality and consequence do not have to share a motive to arrive at the same door. The owners cared that their investment had been damaged by their employees' contempt, and contempt that costs money is the only kind of contempt an institution reliably punishes. 3 weeks after the night at table 14, Theo Brandt was removed as executive chef of Lattice. The announcement, when it came, used the language these announcements always use, about pursuing other opportunities and wishing him well in his future endeavours. He gave no interviews. The architecture talk had no audience now. A man who had described his food as the work of a singular vision discovered that the vision had never been his to begin with, that it had belonged to the restaurant. And the restaurant had taken it back. And there is no part of a man like that left over once you remove the title he mistook for himself. That is the consequence, and it is enough, and Naomi took no pleasure in it, because her grandmother had taught her that pleasure in another person's ruin is its own kind of poverty. The story does not end at the chef's removal, though, because a stone dropped in water does more than sink. Marisol is the reason it does more. In the days after the video, a reporter found Marisol, the way reporters do, and asked her to describe the night. Marisol could have stayed quiet. She had bills and a lease and no power in that building, and the safe thing was to say nothing. She did not do the safe thing. She told the reporter, on the record, that the chef had ordered her to refuse a guest, and that she had known it was wrong and had not known how to stop it, and that she was ashamed she had stood there, and that she hoped the woman, wherever she was, knew that not everyone in that room agreed. That is the Allies' choice, and it cost her something to make it. She was let go from Lattice a week or two quietly, with a reason given that had nothing to do with the truth. Naomi heard about it. An inspector hears about everything, and an inspector who carries a brass spoon to remember what she is tasting for does not forget a server who told the truth at her own expense. What Naomi did next, she did entirely outside her work, on her own time and her own name, the real one. She found Marisol. She took her to lunch at a small place with paper menus and good light, the kind of place Pearl would have recognized. A corner diner where the coffee came in heavy white mugs, and the woman behind the counter called everyone honey without it meaning anything, except that you were welcome. She did not tell her at first who she was. She let Marisol talk. She listened the way her grandmother had listened, with her whole attention, and at the end of the meal she told Marisol the truth about Table 14, and about the card, and about why she had set it down face up and slid it to the edge nearest the chef. Marisol put her fork down when she understood. She sat back in the booth and looked at Naomi for a long moment, and then she laughed. Once, the kind of laugh that has tears very close behind it. Because she had spent 3 weeks believing she had stood frozen while a stranger was humiliated and walked out, and now she understood that the stranger had been the one person in the room who held the power, and had chosen to use it not for revenge but for a covenant Marisol had not known was being kept on her behalf. She said she had not done it for herself. She said she had done it because a young woman with a wine list in her hand had been made to carry someone else's cruelty, and that nobody should have to do that and call it job. Then she told Marisol something else. There is a thing that happens to the spaces an institution controls when the truth finally moves through them. The geography rearranges itself. The good table by the window and the bad table by the service station, the chef at the pass and the server sent away. The host who asks twice for a name. All of it is architecture, and architecture can be torn down and built again. Naomi had spent 6 years documenting kitchens that broke the covenant. She had begun, in the months around that October, to think about building one that kept it. She had savings and a reputation among the few people who knew her real work, and an idea she had carried since the filling station closed. She was going to open a restaurant, not a temple to a singular vision. A place built on her grandmother's principle that the door is the door and food is food and you feed everyone who comes, and that you find out who a cook is by how they cook when it is hard. She had the room already, a corner space in a part of the city the famous designers had not discovered yet, with big windows and old brick and good bones. She offered Marisol the floor, not a job bussing trays at the bad table. The floor. To run the dining room, to hire the servers, to build a service that treated the family paying in the equivalent of eggs, the same as the banker, because that was the whole point, and Marisol already understood it, had understood it instinctively on the worst night of her short career, when she had stood frozen between a chef and a guest, and known exactly which one of them was wrong. Marisol said yes. She cried when she said it, and Naomi let her and did not look away, because some tears have been waiting a long time and deserve a witness. The restaurant opened the following spring. Naomi named it Pearls, after a woman who had run a filling station with 4 tables and fed 40 mile. Drives and never once written down a recipe, because the recipes were never the point. The brass measuring spoon hung on a nail by the stove, where Naomi could reach it, and she used it the way her grandmother had, for tasting, not for measuring, because she trusted her own mouth, and she was teaching the young cooks to trust theirs. Lattice is still open, under a new chef, serving very good food to people who can afford it. It does not have a star. It may get one someday under someone else, if the someone else understands what Brant never did. That is not Naomi's concern anymore. She made her report and she closed the file, and she moved on, the way her work required, to the next kitchen and the next quiet night. Here is the part you should hold on to. The night at table 14 was not a story about a card. The card was the smallest thing in it. A man went pale, not because of a piece of cardboard, but because the piece of cardboard told him, all at once, that the person he had decided was beneath his attention had been holding his entire future in her folded hands the whole time, and that he had revealed himself completely before he ever knew he was being watched. That is the oldest lesson there is, and people keep needing to learn it. You do not know who is sitting at the table you decided not to set. That is the small lesson, though, the one that makes the satisfying video. The large lesson is the one Pearl knew, the one she said in a filling station to a girl shelling beans on a crate by the back door. You find out who a person is by how they treat the people they think can do nothing for them. The banker gets fed. Anybody will feed the banker. The measure of a kitchen, the measure of a person, is the family that can only pay in eggs, the guest at the bad table, the young server you can order around because she needs the job. Naomi's grandmother fed all of them with the same hands, and that, not the cornbread and not the butter beans, is why a man who had eaten in Paris cried at her 4-table counter. If you have ever been the person at table 14, seated by the service station, made to wait for water, refused in front of a room, here is what I want you to take from Naomi Carver. Your value was never on trial in that dining room. The person who could not see it was the one being tested, and they failed. And you walked out with your chin level and your value entirely intact because it was never theirs to grant or deny. They did not have the authority. They only had the title, and the title, it turns out, is a much smaller thing than they led you to believe. And if you have ever been Marisol, standing frozen with someone else's cruelty in your hands, told to carry it and smile, know that the moment you tell the truth at your own expense is the moment a door opens that you cannot yet see. It opened for her. It opens more often than the world admits. Naomi still carries the brass spoon. She carries it to every kitchen she inspects. And she keeps the original on the nail at Pearl's, and on the slow afternoons before service, she sometimes takes it down and drags its worn, bright edge across the bottom of a pot and tastes and thinks of a screen door that used to slap, and a woman who fed everyone, and the truth that a kitchen always tells about a person, in the end, whether they want it told or not. She does not think about the chef at all. That, more than anything, is how you know she won.